Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We're excited about today's presentation. We've got a real treat for you. Today we're joined by Jahan Azizi, Special Project Manager at Healthmark Industries. Webinar Wednesday would like to thank our sponsor today, Healthmark. Since 1969, Healthmark Industries Company has developed and marketed innovative solutions to aid healthcare facilities in their delivery of surgical instruments and other life-saving medical devices to patients. Healthmark Industries' mission is to continue to innovate, support, and serve the healthcare provider industry and support services that make it possible to deliver quality healthcare. Visit hmark.com for more information. Again, today's sponsor is Healthmark Industries. We do want to encourage you to visit their website. You can visit it at hmark.com. Couple of reminders before we get started today with our presentation. We do ask that all attendees save the date for the next MD Expo. It's going to happen October 11 through 13. The MD Expo SoCal will be nestled in the Temecula Valley's picturesque Southern California wine country. We're going to hold it at Pechanga Casino and Resort, and our call for presenter is still open through May 16th. MD Expo seeks presenters who can offer firsthand experience implementing new technologies, case studies of process improvement in healthcare technology management, best practices using techniques and maximize efficiency to reduce costs, or practical ways to facilitate interdepartmental communication. If you have an education idea that you'd like to submit for the MD Expo, please do so online at mdexposhow.com. Today's webinar is eligible for 1 CE credit from the ACI. You can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey. This survey will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of the webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit from the ACI, and you'll be able to download your certificate directly from your computer or desktop. If you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. All right, attendees, as I mentioned earlier, we do have Jahan Azizi as our presenter today. He will provide an overview of the HTM professional's role as it pertains to patient safety with specific focus on safety-related endoscopes. Jahan, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Jane. As I mentioned, I'm Jahan Azizi. I'm a certified biomedical technologist. My current position at Healthmark is Special Projects Manager. But prior to that, I worked at University of Michigan for 28 years at a couple different medical device manufacturers, and also worked at Food and Drug Administration. So I've been at all three sides of medical devices. Obviously, on this presentation, all the opinions are mine, and this presentation basically reflects the technique, approach, and opinion of the individual presenters. And before using any medical device, obviously, you need to use the packaging, IFUs, instruction for use, and anything really related to safety warning prior to using that. And in overall, Healthmark policies to provide our customers and healthcare community with the highest quality state-of-the-art medical technologies. And this goal supported by our commitment to our customers. And this presentation is part of that commitment. So what we're going to talk about today on objectives is we're going to define the HTM profession and professional. And basically, these are for if you are not a biomed and you don't know your biomed or HTM. As I'm going back and forth, I'm going to either say HTM or biomed. For the old timers that, like me, we use the biomed, but HTM obviously is more encompassed on that. So then we're going to talk about what do the HTM professional do, define the medical device, and role of the HTM professional in hospital as related to patient safety, and talk about reporting, the requirement for medical device reporting. And we're going to talk about endoscope clinical use and the history of endoscope, and look at some of the design of endoscope, the angles, the internal lumen, and the stuff that goes inside making that endoscope. And then we're going to look inside an endoscope and look at some approaches to make sure that the endoscope are safe for patient use. And that really brings in the HTM professional to see what can they do to help the other portion of. As I mentioned, that health technology management, or HTM, basically these are the heart of the hospital, that sometimes they call it glue that everything holds together. We're involved in patient safety, we're involved in medical technology, financial stewardship. HTMs are involved in purchasing, pre-purchase evaluation, capital planning, we're involved on maintenance, look at on-call if you're not a 24/7 hospital, being on call, provide a lot of clinical consultation and training the staff. I mean, sometimes the hospital purchase a monitor or different technology and they get a quick overview, but overall, bulk of the training is in the hand of biomed. And then obviously the proper maintenance of healthcare. Sometimes you combine in-house with basically multi-million-dollar contracts. Those falls under the HTM. And obviously disaster plan. As we know with the COVID-19, we had a lot of HTM department were involved in that process. Just to expand on that, subset of the HTM is biomedical or clinical engineering. In 1992, American College of Clinical Engineering defined the clinical engineer is a professional who supports and advances patient care by applying engineering and managerial skill to healthcare technology. So therefore, that a clinical engineer as a whole is the application of the engineering technology to analyze and provide solution for clinical need. And actually, if you want to learn more about this, Joseph Dyer will have this 9 discipline of clinical engineering handbook, and it goes more involved in that. Today we're going to talk about HTM within the hospital or healthcare system, but it expands beyond that. From basically, if you look at from healthcare technology management, safety, medical device services, technology application, information technology to education and training, research, clinical, and standard and regulation, which really encompass the whole gamma of what clinical engineering, biomedical, or HTM are involved in. But within the hospital puts clinical engineering and HTM in a unique role because we basically all over in contact and communication with nurses, with clinicians, with users of all kinds. And we get that constant feedback. If the device is working perfect, obviously, we don't call, but if a device is new and there's a lot of use issue, human factor issue, we get a lot of calls, we document those. I know some of the maintenance management system, you can actually code those to know that how many user issue you receive, how many of those issues related to use of the technology. We point out obviously to a design versus just a user not knowing how to use it. And are often in communication. So hopefully you feed those information back to the manufacturer. I know as a biomed, we used to contact device manufacturer and constantly going back and forth if you have an issue. So hopefully you get those as a feedback. But in addition to that, as you know, prior to 1992, which I talk about a little more detail, some of those information was between the technician and receiver of the call at that medical device manufacturer. I know sometimes you would call one technician at the service call and you get an answer, you call somebody else. But really some of the, even these medical device manufacturers didn't have a really good system to keep track of all those calls to basically make some sense out of issue if there's a design issue with that technology. But we have the ability as a HTM to report these to FDA, to a database that we can look into it. Overall, what is a medical device? Now we're talking about that. What is a medical device? Really, as we mentioned, that is, as they say that from tongue depressor to MRI, and everything is between, that falls under medical device. And the FDA definition which is in the code 301, section 201, said an item either used for diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of disease or intended to affect the body that does not achieve its primary purpose through chemical action or metabolism within the body. So if it's not a drug, basically it's a device, if you look at that as a simplicity. But really everything is in the hospital that falls under that and more. Sometimes I know as a lonely biomed in a smaller hospital that if it doesn't fall under maintenance, I usually get called in to look at that. But if you want to know that if something come in the hospital, if it's a medical device or if it's cleared by FDA, is really going into MOD database and looking at the devices by either by classification, class 1, 2, 3, or HDE, or looking at it by model number. It gives you a general idea, first of all, if this device is FDA regulated, is in a database, or is working correctly. My involvement as a clinical engineer at the University of Michigan with the basically SPD was in 2009. There was an issue at one of the hospitals in Houston, Texas, which there were 7 patients cross-contaminated, and unfortunately one of them died. So when you have a cluster of the patients, CDC, Center for Disease, get involved and trying to investigate, see what's going on. In this case, they actually shut the operating room off for 2 weeks, and they went through all the instruments that were used on those 7 patients. And they found out in particular one item, arthroscopic shaver, that was in common with all the patients. And when they looked inside that, they found some tissue, some human item inside the, we call them junks, inside the cannula of these shavers. And during the investigation, they used a boroscope. Actually, they didn't have boroscope at the time. They used a 2.7 endoscope to look inside that to see what's going on. They also found a brush bristle on that. So in this case, since the shaver was an FDA regulated item, CDC contact FDA, and FDA at that time sent an email or letter to all the hospital at the University of Michigan. We received an email, and he said that the FDA has become aware of an event in which tissue was remained within certain arthroscopic shaver, even after following manufacturer recommended cleaning. And additionally, he said that report submitted to the FDA suggests that the tissue retained was not evidence to naked eye, and multiple manufacturers obviously send letter to the user or to the hospital, say that make sure that you're following the issue and make sure that following the IFU for cleaning. So when we received those letters, took one of those endoscope, 2.7 mil endoscope, and looked inside the shaver, and we found similar items that basically CDC found within those shavers. So literally we had 21 shaver, and when we looked at them, they all had something within them. So that was the shaver type that was involved with that issue. And then as we know with the biomed, we want to know what's going on. We take one and take a saw and cut it in half to see what is inside it. So as you see, part of the issue that when I fed back my information to FDA said that the design of these shavers is really does not allow for adequate cleaning, because at the time the conversation between the FDA and the device manufacturer was that the users are not following the instructions for cleaning. And really when you look at this, is at some point it's impossible to clean some of these. So while we're looking at those shaver, we found out that really anything with lumen that you cannot see with naked eye could have those issues. So we had about 350 suction tips. We looked at them with a scope and we found out there's some issue. This particular one, I couldn't clean. You know, we were going through the process of cleaning. When I cut it open, looks like there were no way to clean this because the gunk would go inside this hollow area and wouldn't allow the brush really to get in that. So 2 reasons. One, when they designed this, it either was meant for disposable, but from the outside, there were no indications saying that one-time use or disposable or what have you. But when we opened it, we we realized that is not cleanable. Or when they designed it, obviously the cleaning was not part of in their mind. So you're looking at that. There are tons of room and item within the hospital that are difficult to clean because of all the angles and everything you have. At the same time, we had some issue with endoscope when we looked inside them, and basically a stand that was uh, when they were putting a stand in a patient, another stand popped up. It's not like buy one get one free, but at the same time they found out that the second stand was actually the one that was retained from a previous patient. They were intended to put on a patient, but they didn't. The stand was stuck inside the endoscope, and when they deployed the stand was intended for that patient, another one came up. So let's look at that. So what is endoscope? Just assuming that you're not involved with the endoscopy unit, but endoscopy is basically looking inside in a not surgical way that you can look inside. And these procedures are minimal invasive procedure. That means you don't have to cut into the patient. And they go inside, look at the organs. Sometimes they go treat the problem. And if not, they take picture or video and share it with patient, or come up with a treatment down the road if they need to do surgery. There are many types of endoscope. We have bronchoscope, we have colonoscope, cystoscope, laparoscope. There are upper GI, lower GI. There are all kind of scope that are in the hospital that they use. And it's really nothing new. If you go back to the history of endoscopy, there's a endovision that shows the history of endoscopy. The first one was came out, it was in 1868. And as you see that here, that it was not a rigid, obviously, and I'm sure it didn't feel comfortable, especially with the lack of anesthetic. But I'm sure after that procedure, you could become a sword swallower for that case. So that was the first endoscope that came out. Then this later on in 1932, we had this kind of semi-flexible endoscope that came out. That portion of it was flexible and portion of it was rigid. Then the first true endoscope, flexible endoscope, was 1957, that it came out and actually was able to use fiber optic lights to be able to make it flexible. And obviously with the coming up with the CCD and chips, in 1984, we have the similar version that we have today with the revolution of optics, that you be able actually to take pictures digitally and then display them in the monitor or print them what you have. So today, if you go to a hospital, the endoscopy suite is basically sometimes was more modern than the operating rooms. They have tons of monitors, towers, and all the information that you need is in one room. And obviously is a lot more easier to perform the procedure because the technology is out there. But so why are we talking about that safe endoscope? If you look at some of the headlines in the past several years, there are a lot of issues, sometimes in large numbers. So we have, for example, super linked to 2 deaths in UCLA. In this case, we had 281 hospital patient exposed to drug-resistant E. coli that was due to the endoscope. So you have all these basically headlines that we know that obviously these are the tip of the iceberg, because once you have one, then what's going on? I'm just going to switch to a little bit that for those reports that don't make it to the headline. As you know, that the Safe Medical Device Act of 1990, basically Congress enacted this Safe Medical Device Act, or as they call it, SMDA, to increase the information that basically FDA received from the manufacturer and healthcare system. Obviously, that should have been covered under MDR, but Congress decided that maybe they need a different approach to check and balance to bring some of these reports to facility. And basically, under the SMDA, device user, facility, and manufacturer must report death and serious injury to FDA and to the manufacturer. And this law basically was signed by in 1992, in June of 16, 1992. And is a public act, and this is the number for 102-300. And a device user facility device, basically as a hospital, ambulatory surgical facility, nursing home, or outpatient treatment facility. In other words, that outpatient facility that they are not physician office are required to report to the FDA and the manufacturer. And basically, the requirements are report death to FDA and the manufacturer, report serious injury to the manufacturer or to the FDA if you don't know the manufacturer, you don't have the address of the manufacturer, and submit the event within 10 work days. And then obviously, if you're not part of MedSun, that you need to send the annual report to FDA. And when they look at that, you must have an MDR procedure and you must have an MDR event file. So, and if you look at the Joint Commission, similar things on the EC 020401, EP 11, he said that need to addresses the reporting of incident of death or injury and illness to that. So why do we need to report? So most medical devices do not go through a clinical trial. So this is the first time sometimes your hospital, my hospital, would have an issue, and then we became aware of that. And the reason being that only really on all the medical devices that come through in process, only 10% of it require clinical trial, that the manufacturer must select 200 or 300 patients, what have they decide, and do clinical trial, test them within a patient and test them at the healthcare setting. 47% of these devices, they call a low risk and thus pre-market exam. So you don't have to do anything. They just have to let FDA know that you have them. And another 42% show are similar. They call them substantial equivalent to another device that is in the market. You don't have to really show that. For example, the infusion pump is one of those items that we have. So when you report under Safe Medical Device Act or manufacturer under medical device reporting, all those reports goes to this MOD database, which is a stand for Manufacturer and User Facilities Service Experience. So if you go in there, there's a lot of, if you haven't been on FDA Access database, you have all these on the side that you can select if there's a medical device was if at fault. Sometimes you think that you're the only one, but when you look out there, there are other patients that have similar issue. So what we have done in the past several years, we've been partnered with Corey Offset and Associate, and she goes mine these data. You have to look at that. You receive, FDA receive about 100,000 or more of these reports on a yearly basis. So you need to mine them to see what's going on, what you have. There are all kind of report in this MOD database. And what Offset does, it goes in, look at all these reports and basically put them in the various buckets. For example, this report is from beginning of the year till end of March. You see that, for example, Boroscope, there are 487 reports, uretero 92, duodenoscope 473. So in this last quarter, 3 months, we had about 3,516. And if you look at the past really 2 years, 9 quarters, you see that there are always tons of reports. Say, for example, from Q1 to here, you see a lot of reports. Some of these lower ones, it could be just a number, but as you know, during the COVID, we didn't have a lot of these procedures were not being performed. So partly maybe they didn't have issue. The other one maybe because of the lower procedure, there were not as many reports. But as you see that there are thousands of reports related to endoscope in that. So we go back, then why? What's going on? Hopefully, you know, we are aware of the issue, but we still have those reports coming through. This is a schematic of what we have. Basically, endoscope is a really complex, long piece of equipment. Some of them, they have 4 different channels. For example, if you look at the yellow is a biopsy channel, green is air channel, blue is water channel, and auxiliary water is on the purple here or magenta color. So here you have all these channels within that. So this is good, it's a schematic. But as we know with the biomed, we like to really open the case or look under the hood to see what's going on. Here's the endoscope that we have. So we took the shield enough to see really what is under that and what causing not being clean, what's going on with that. So we're going to go through and kind of look at it a little more. Here what we have, this area that knobology you see a lot of as we go look at that. There are a lot of tubes and metal and different items get connected together. So if you look at a little closer look at that, you have a lot of transition point between different items coming together. And when you look even a little more closer here, you see a lot of angles here. Like if you look at that, this is obviously come from one point going towards the patient and the other portion of it going through the instrument or machine that operates that. So you see all these nooks and crannies that goes inside that. And if you look a little more closer inside these, anytime you have a transition point, you go from one material to a different one, or you go overlook at them in this case, you're going to have an area that debris is going to accumulate. So we have the first poll question. And the question is that, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Jahan. I was just going to say we're going to launch the poll for the attendees. You are correct. The first question is going to be, are you using magnification boroscope to check newly purchased instruments during the incoming inspection? Attendees, the question is on your screen right now. The options to answer is either yes or no. Jahan, while the attendees are answering, is there anything that you'd like to add or expand on for this question?
No, it just basically we'd like to know that HTM usually what they do when we're doing either pre-purchase evaluation or trial or incoming inspection, we really didn't accept that all the instruments or medical devices are in good shape. We didn't take their word for it. So we did a thorough incoming inspection and looked at all the different portion of the devices to make sure that everything is good. We're just trying to find out really, do we do the same thing with that? After all, an endoscope is a $30,000, $40,000 piece of equipment that we receive. What do we look inside it when we receive this really expensive medical device?
Well, it looks like 79% of the attendees today do not use magnification or boroscope to check newly purchased instruments, leaving 21% that said yes. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. It should take you right back to your presentation.
Okay, good. Thank you. So why do we have to do that? So when I was doing a study for FDA due to that arthroscopic shaver, so we decided to extend the scope of that and include anything really with lumen, including some of the suction tip, endoscope. So we purchased a slew of different technologies to look at it. So part of when I was looking at that, for example, on those thumb hole with the suction tips, you see that really when they manufacture these, there's a lot of defect on that. And I think we had about 15, 20% of them that had issue. Actually, we had to put aside and let the manufacturer know that they were issue. Or this is that when they were drilling, the drill went inside these. And one more, that this is interesting, that you see that there's a piece of shaving that was attached to this. And my assumption was that, so if you put this through the normal washing, would come up, but it didn't for two reasons. One, obviously, when they were shaving, it was hot and got stuck in this area. And the other part was that it didn't come out no matter what we did. So when we brushed it and went run it through the normal process, and this shaving piece didn't come out. So that was really interesting, that because we were buying these brand new, they're medical devices from well-known medical device manufacturer, and here we have some defect on something that you don't assume that you need to look into it. Or for example, when you purchase an endoscope, when you look at it, this is what it's supposed to look like. So you shouldn't have anything else. You have some of these as you show from opening it up, you have some issue, but overall, it should have free of defects. So really, that should be the simple things, that when you receive something from the manufacturer, make sure to look at it to see what you purchased in this crack. As I said, especially these are not really inexpensive. They're $30,000-$40,000 piece of instrument. I know we used to check the Dopplers, $400 or $500, but not checking this, it doesn't make sense. But for inspection after in use, FDA recommend that obviously all routine cleaning instruction should include instruction for visual inspection, which may include the use of magnification. So FDA basically recommend that you must have some magnification, lighted magnification on hand to check usually instrument that you're in use. So it's important additional that visual inspection instruction should include that what is acceptable. So for example, if you see something like this, is it acceptable? What is it? And then you need to make that determination to put it back in use or not. So as I mentioned, when we were doing in 2009 the study and testing for that arthroscopic shaver, there was really no boroscope. Basically, I'm looking at a boroscope endoscope is look inside human being. Boroscope is to look inside the endoscope. And we designed this because, as you saw, some of those lumens are about a millimeter in diameter. So we designed these. The boroscope, basically, you have a 106 millimeter and you have 1.9 millimeter with high resolution, but 160,000 pixels to be able to pick up those defects. So here, what we have, if you have you did your income inspection and your scope is really good and you accepted it. And if not, when you look over time, you see there are some issue. For example, over time, you see there are some junk and rust here. I don't know what are these. Probably they are stuff that shouldn't be within the endoscope. And here, sometimes the outer shield, that plastic rubber, if you bend it, it probably could pop back up. But those clear tubing could get damaged. So if you look at these here, and once you get that, it's really difficult to run the brush through these area and clean them. And here, for example, you see a damaged ureteroscope. So part of it is that have it on hand for income inspection, but moreover to use it as you go forward. So here, if you have if you FDA and you have a really high magnification, this was a patient use. Although you couldn't see those with boroscope, but when you magnify these to micrometer, you can actually see that. So when they use that DAPI protocol, you put these in and then you run it under the light, you see all these popping up. So even a scope that looks good, you possibly have groove in it. Reason being that potential for the maybe the instrument that you put in, or sometimes even you have a brush that has a sharp tip that could damage the inside the endoscope. So when we were doing the study at U of M, one of the surgeon always said, okay, yeah, I see these debris, these stuff, but what are those? And really the point is that, okay, so what is that? Blood? Is that tissue? Is it just a little piece of brush? And what kind of effect going to have on patient? So there are two different surveillance. One is cleaning verification, which is basically after you manually clean to just see that you cleaned it effectively. And one is microbial surveillance. This is really after AER, or if you have it in storage, you want to see that what's going on. Or if you have a contamination or cross-contamination, you can check all your scope if there's something wrong with that process. For cleaning verification, you basically look for protein, carbohydrate, you look for hemoglobin or adenosine triphosphate. But for microbial surveillance, this is basically test for bacteria. You basically need to culture, send it to a lab internal, or send it to external lab, such as Nelson lab or so forth, that they actually can look for bacteria on, for example, gram-negative part. Since we had these issue, the FDA and CDC basically, what they come up with this 55-page guidance, which is available for download for free, and basically looking at that, you need for microbial surveillance that you need to do samples. So basically, in this case, you see that this person put in 20 cc of still water, followed by 60 cc of strained air, and then somebody else collect that sample and then send it to a lab for microbial issue. What we did when we realized that it was really difficult, you needed two people, and we found out some of our samples were contaminated with dry skin or environmental issue. So when we're looking at this, we say that, wow, we need a technology, obviously, that is self-sufficient, and moreover, that you don't need extra hands, especially nowadays, you don't have extra hand in the hospital. What can we do? So what we did is call it TTF, is turbulent fluid flow. And basically what you do, you mix the air and water together and then create a shear effect that you can create a sample. So turbulent generates basic pressure and shear effect of that air and water caused to go inside the various channel and remove the debris, move it. As I indicated, that is a self-contained device. And we did a side-by-side study, actually, Michelle Alpha and Dr. Pani and Labib did, and we found out that the turbulent fluid flow has a basically effective efficiency, extraction efficiency up to 99%, 99.7%. Versus if you look at the manual process, which is, they call it flush, brush, flush, you can see they are much lower. So here's, for example of that. You see the one that you had, there was some issue with that. So when we ran it for cleaning, we found out obviously this did not pass. It failed basically. There was something, carbohydrate, protein inside that shape. So the next poll question is, are you verifying the output pressure of your leak tester using a gauge?
All right, Jahan, we have launched the poll for the attendees, so you'll now see that question on your screen. Again, it reads, are you verifying the output pressure of your leak tester using a gauge? Your options again are yes and no. While the attendees are voting, Jahan, is there anything that you'd like to add here?
Sure, yeah, so what I'm gonna show you the next few slide, that what really is going on, that if you don't do that. Again, we've been in various hospitals and we found out that the leak tester that is meant for testing the leak on these endoscope, I haven't seen really either HTM tag, or really are they basically an equipment management system? Are you keeping track of those? What's going on? So really that was kind of to see that is somebody testing those leak tester that's supposed to help if the device is in good shape.
Well, the attendees have voted and 41% answered yes, 59% answering no. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll, hiding the results, and you can pick up with your presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for that. So for the 59% that didn't, this could happen to your scope. So this scope actually went for repair. And when they received it, they were looking for some other issue. When they opened it up, took that black shield off, this is what they saw underneath that shield. So they didn't know it was leaking, so they didn't send this for repair for leak. So this is what happened if you have an inadequate leak tester. So what was a leak tester? If you're not familiar, obviously the leak test in the endoscope is an important part of cleaning. So when they receive it, when it's not even put in the water, you're supposed to basically leak test it, use a leak tester. For example, in this case, this is an Olympus leak tester. You plug it in and you make sure that there's no air escaping from that. As I said before, this is performed before immersion it inside the water. And you have obviously automated leak tester, but you also have manual leak tester. So this is a leak tester that showed the leak. Let me go back again. So you see that when they put in the water, they actually see the leak where it's coming from. And in this case, obviously, they need to follow the procedure and send this back for repair, either to manufacturer or what have you. So in overall, when we've been looking at the leak testers, we've been finding out there are some of them that actually don't provide adequate pressure to detect the leak within the scope. So automated leaks should be placed in calibration mode to do that. One of the things that we found out when you look at the IFU for these leak tests, there's a button, and it said that you push the button, if you hear hissing, then you're in good shape. Looking at that, really a faulty leak tester are infection control issue. As you saw, for example, in that scope that was sent for repair, and they found all those gunk inside it. So for example, what we have here, this is a leak tester. If you plug it in, you're supposed to see about 4 psi here, and if you attach the attachment to it, should be between 2.9 and 4 psi. So what you need to do in crack pressure is not going to detect that leak, especially when you fold these, roll these endoscope to do the leak testing. Sometimes they could be mass. So you need to have adequate pressure to be able to detect those leaks. And what again, as an issue we had with those endoscope not being leak tested appropriately, we designed these leak testers or LTT that actually you can verify the various leak tester, and we made that for various manufacturers. For example, in this case, we're talking about Olympus. If you need at least 4 psi if you go directly, and then if you have the attachment MB155, 2.9 to 4.1 psi, and we made those for Olympus, for Pentax stores, and really other ones. So here's, for example, we have some that you see at least about 6 psi. You see various ones that you have some gauge. So that's really the important part of that for the 50+%, that you really need to leak test these, and that's a really major issue, because if you don't have it, that cross-contamination could happen and could sicken the patient. And it's really not just what you have it automated. You go in, you see a lot of these manual pumps that you don't know if they are really providing adequate pressure, and then if there's no leak because of the O-ring, or over time these tubing is starting to dry up. So overall, as far as the HTM, part of that was, as we know, mentioned that endoscope are really important devices that about 10 million procedures performed per year in the United States. So it's important that to make sure that they are defect-free, and make sure that these complex design, that they're not causing some of the issue. Clean verification on microbial surveillance, as I indicated, that when they were doing the testing, sometimes we didn't know if the failure of those microbial testing was as a result of the environment or how the process that we took, because obviously if you want to make sure that there's nothing, you should do some of the procedure in the operating room, a clean operating room. But if you don't have that flexibility, or not available, or not willing to go after hour or weekend, you're going to have some issue. Overall, boroscopes, we found out that really they're valuable tools. So if you don't have a boroscope in biomed or HTM, is a really good tool to have to look inside all those areas. Because as I mentioned, that when we used to do a pre-purchase evaluation, or even sometimes during income inspection, we try to open the case to see what is inside, because it's just a nice clean schematic really doesn't give us the full story. So this one allows you to see some defects that you cannot see with a really nice casing around it. And the leak tester, obviously, we found out that the testing that we have done on those leak tester, there are a lot of ones that don't pass. So if you don't have adequate pressure, you're not going to send adequate pressure inside the scope to be able to detect those leaks. So the turbulent fluid flow, the two-phase flow, really, that's something that it came out of those issues. And part of my hope is that talking to the HTM environment to really look at some of those shortcomings. For example, scope manufacturers, some of them do have leak tester, but some of them don't. They have these, you need to do microbial surveillance, clean verification, but really they don't give you appropriate tools. When you're looking at that, is it damaged? Obviously, they don't make boroscope, because when I was doing the study, they didn't have boroscope. Even right now, they're not really. The point is that how do you test to see if the cleaning is adequate? And obviously, you need those technologies that they don't provide to make sure that these are good. So this technique obviously used for biomedical clinical engineering to make sure that you have adequate tools to basically do your job. And that's really the relationship between SPD and HTM. It needs to create that, because at the end of the day, they put their scope on our biomed tower, to make sure that it works. So if you're taking care of your tower, you're doing the testing, you're doing the performance maintenance, you're doing preventive maintenance. However, if the scope is not adequately clean and you cause infection to patient, for example, in that case in Texas, they shut down the OR for 2 weeks because they didn't want any procedure to happen to know what's going on. So if it didn't happen to you, you don't have to wait till it comes to you. That's what when we're looking at the MOD database, it's going to be really helpful to look at that, see how many issues are happening and what do HTM need to do to get involved with that. I have tons of resources in that. I'm happy to share this PowerPoint or the resources with you. But most of the stuff that I talked about obviously are in public domain. You can get them. Some of the recent thing happened is that this AMI ANSI, I'm sure we all are part of the AMI ANSI standard, that the ST91 in 2001 basically was actually published in 2002, is talking about flexible and rigid endoscope reprocessing. It's really a good document to look inside to see what happened. But what I was trying to say that what we really need to do is common sense. It's nothing that elaborate. You just need to follow the procedure, make sure that you receive a decent endoscope or surgical instrument, and then make sure that it's been followed by adequate cleaning and reprocessing. Okay, any questions? So that's really what I'm hoping that we get a lot of good questions to see what's going on, at least as we move forward, trying to look for what can we do to find the problem and come up with a solution for it.
Absolutely. We have a couple of questions that came in from attendees, but a quick reminder, any attendees that have additional questions, you can submit them now using the question feature on your webinar dashboard. Jahan, the first question, our surgical instruments are FDA approved. Why do we need to perform an incoming inspection?
As I mentioned from that slide, but and this comes out too, even when I was a biomed at University of Michigan, sometimes the salesperson would come and say, these are FDA approved. As from that slide said that about 90% of medical instruments, medical devices are not really FDA approved in the sense that they did a clinical study, they submitted a study for FDA. Some of you just have to register with FDA. So they're not really FDA approved. Could be FDA clear or in the database or what have you. So a lot of them really have issues. Hence, you're looking at the MOD database, receive all these reports post-market. There are issues that you say that, wow, this should have been detected. So it is important to look at that because as you saw with the situation that I had, up to 20% of my suction tip failed because obviously the quality control didn't check for all those shaving inside that. And you'd be surprised that even look at some of the more expensive, the same thing I did with arthroscopic shaving, and some of them they had spot of rust on them the first day that I received them. So you need to look at that, trust but verify situation. We need to verify that what you receive is really adequate because the salesperson said FDA approved. That is not really always true. Hopefully that answered the question.
I hope so too. Another attendee wanted to know, should the manufacturer validate the cleaning process in the hospital setting for all types of surgical instruments?
So going back to that, obviously, is if those are high class 3 devices or new devices, which falls under 10%, they should do that. That's part of the process. But majority of them, they don't. And it was interesting that when we had that issue with the shaver, or even with the endoscope that as you look at today, they really didn't do that. They didn't go through the real side. So they have the laboratory testing, they perform some testing in the lab, they use some artificial test soil and what have you, but that's not always the same as really putting the use and going through the normal process. For example, at U of M, we had, they process 40,000 surgical instruments on a daily basis. So that kind of true real life issue that they need to do, but unfortunately it doesn't happen with all the instrument and devices that they sell or market in US.
We have a question from an attendee. How would manufacturers address post-market issues related to cleanabilities?
Well, that was actually interesting question, because that was as a result of that issue with arthroscopic shaver. Once we looked inside the one that we had, and we found out issue with every single one of them, or even at the endoscope when we were looking at them. And during the study took 25,000 photos, and every single one had some kind of debris inside them. So when we were looking at those and shared that with the medical device manufacturer, at the first glance was that this obviously is the user issue. It's always easier to point the finger. But then later on they came up, modified their IFU, that you need to do this, you need to add this to it. They add checking them with Boroscope magnification, and then later on they removed it because not everybody was following it. So really, sometimes they just update the IFU. I don't think that's a really good solution, versus say, wow, we do have a problem. Let's look at the clinical use and partner with one of the hospital to see what is the issue and try to solve that. So right now with the endoscope, obviously their concentration on the duodenoscope, that they're saying that, okay, since you cannot clean them with high level disinfection, maybe we need to sterilize them. And then now the second point is that, okay, maybe we need to go to disposable, which by itself, that's going to create a lot of issues. Obviously, the cost and the disposal of all those disposable endoscope. We know that the reusable one, obviously you need different technology to make sure that they're in perfect shape versus disposable one that's going to be. So really the approach sometimes, I think it should be a little more, let's partner and collaborate with each other, versus that I do manufacture, you purchase. Once you purchase, basically, buyers be aware is your problem. So I've been disappointed in some of the response on some of these issues that they've been coming up and responding to them.
Another question, what are examples of HTM and SPD success stories?
Well, this is sometimes is one of those questions that if you don't have problem, you do a great job, nobody knows about it. So sometimes I think that if you haven't been in the headline of the newspaper, your local newspaper, you're in good shape. If you don't have a lot of internal issue with lawsuits and patient harm, that's what the end of my career at U of M I was doing, working for risk management as clinical engineer. So you see that a lot of those issues, that if you haven't seen that, you're in good shape. But really, I think Biomed or HTM that work closely have sometimes for other part of it. I know at University of Michigan, our example, we did look at that. We found issues, then we tried to find solution for it, and we collaborated with FDA, with medical device manufacturers, that they were willing to do that. So I think really the collaboration is the key. So if you have a collaboration, I see that when I go to AMI, that for example, those standard committee, some hospitals been really successful at sending staff to those standards to really send their input back in those that they when FDA or medical device manufacturer look at those standards and guidelines. Hopefully they can design a better device. Or if you're reporting, I've seen some of the hospitals that report to FDA is not really a punitive item. This should be really a feedback to the manufacturer. So if those hospitals that they've been doing that, you see that a lot of really good reports are sent by hospitals that they, somebody like myself or anybody else, Corey Offset in this case, can look at those reports and make a determination that if it's a device is problematic or not. So yes, the collaboration is the key. So if those hospitals are doing collaboration, really those are the winners.
Jahan, we have an attendee who's asking for some clarification. To your knowledge, is it true physician offices do not report incidents? And do you know if private GI offices would have to?
So under that law, as I show you on that PowerPoint, that private physicians do not have to do that. But obviously, if you look at that, if you attach to a hospital, then you fall under the umbrella of that hospital. But yes, I've seen that private physicians do not report to MOD database. So they kind of exempt from that. That's correct, private physician. But if you attach to a health system, you become part of that system and you're supposed to report.
Very good. Well, that is all of the questions that the attendees have submitted, and I certainly want to thank you for your time and your expertise. This was a great presentation. Again, I want to encourage all of the attendees to visit today's sponsor to learn more about their products and services that they provide to the industry. You can visit Healthmark Industries by going to hmark.com. Again, that's HMARK.com. A quick reminder that you can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey. That survey will email to you in 1 hour. You will have to submit the survey to receive the certificate on your desktop, where you can print at your convenience. If you have any questions or issues, don't hesitate to give us an email at webinar@mdpublishing.com. We'll be back next week with another great webinar that's eligible for an additional CE credit from the ACI. If you'd like to go ahead and register for it and upcoming webinars, please do so at webinarwednesday.live. All right, Tech Nation, y'all enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we'll see you back next week.